I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're speaking with Robert Butler. He is an accomplished and prolific author who weaves his experiences as a father, husband, soldier, and lifelong storytelling into his riveting series, including Adopted by Humans, Booze Hounds, Who Endures, and Evolution of a Nobody. Drawing from his rich tradition of bedtime storytelling and a renewed passion for writing, it was sparked during an instructing assignment. The author enthralls his readers with a range of narratives that reflect his personal journey and vivid imagination. We're delighted to have Robert join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the folks at AMZ Pro Hub for helping us put him in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support writers like him by subscribing to our channel. Robert, you are the busiest man in show business, it seems.
I don't know about that, but I do stay occupied.
You were telling me you write one book about every 6 weeks?
Thereabouts. I write about 5 to 10,000 words a day on average, sometimes a little bit less. The most I did in one day was 26,000, which that was a one-off, but about 5 to 10,000 words a day is my average.
Amazing. Do you have a
I've
time
weaponized my
scale?
ADHD.
Well, at least you're satisfying it with something positive, and I know your fans appreciate it as well. Um, Tell me a little bit about, let's begin with the series Adopted by Humans. How has your experience as a soldier influenced your storytelling in that series, Adopted by Humans?
That one. That one's a fun story. It actually started off of a Reddit prompt on r/humans are space orcs. And it got picked up and became kind of popular on the subreddit uh, HFY, and then became a whole novel series. Uh,
Hmm.
I threw in a lot of historical references. I use history a lot in my work, and being in the military for as long as I've been, uh, well, I'm pretty well versed in military history, in dealing with everything from PTSD to social issues. People think that the Army is very, very backwards.
Mhm.
Honestly, in a lot of ways, the Army is at the forefront of everything from, how do the changes in our society, the way we've handled everything from integration up to sexual harassment. It's all something that we have to deal with. We actually go through
Mhm.
regular training, roughly every quarter, on how to deal with everything and how
Mhm.
to file reports and how to treat other people. It's a big part of who we are, to deal with people as individuals. And because the Army is such a diverse institution, it brings in a lot of different perspectives.
Mhm.
And so it was really, when I was writing that series, best way to say this is the main perspective comes from an alien, right? His
Mhm.
first person view, studying humans. He's an anthropologist on a 50-year doctoral study, which, having talked to some PhD folks, they say that's entirely accurate. Um, his perspective on how people treat uh, with other species was heavily inspired by how we came to learn to treat each other, because the stranger is always an alien to us, someone from a different background, a different perspective, a different life. We don't have all that. I grew up in a very different environment and a very different time than someone, say, in their 20s from the Appalachian Mountains or California or New
Mhm.
York. I don't know how every different person from a different life, a different world, a different culture thinks, speaks, acts. And getting to know one another is part of what allows us to become comfortable opening up and to get along and to find common ground. And
Mhm.
that's what a lot of that book deals with in that whole series. I actually just finished the seventh one in that series a couple of days ago. So I'll have that out in the next couple of weeks. But I
Wonderful.
drew pretty heavily on my military experiences for that.
Well, the military is one thing that the United States gets right. Of all the government programs they run, uh, taking care of our armed forces and taking care of our national security seems to be one area that they excel at, which is fortunate. Let's talk next about booze hounds. What's the inspiration behind that? I think I was a booze hound in college. I'm not sure, but let's talk about your
Yes.
booze hounds.
Yes. Okay. So that one was a spin-off series from Adopted by Humans. There was a character that I introduced in Volume 2 of Adopted by Humans named Captain Bonnie Red, an alien space pirate who came from a very repressive culture, a very repressive background, and she abandoned it all. She adopted a kind of pirate persona as an act of rebellion. You know, like how there were bikers in the 50s, hippies in the 60s. Uh, every generation has their rebels, and that became hers. She taught herself English by listening to pirate movies. Very interesting character. And that series follows her and her crew of misfits and outliers jetting around the galaxy trying to keep the ship's bar stocked because they really love their alcohol. There's some humor, some drama. It's a series of short stories. I actually just finished the fourth one of that not too long ago. And it's used to kind of flesh out the overall universe of Adopted by Humans. She was a very compelling character that hit a strong note among a lot of the readership because she came from a background that was traumatized, that was repressed, and she was exposed to a far more open human society and became very fond of humans in general and adopted a lot of our cultural ways and whatnot to just try to find her own idea of happiness.
Where do your readers find your work? I know you've got a great website, theworldmaker.com, but it seems like you've got a loyal legion of fans. Tell us a little bit about how they inspire you to keep on writing, to come up with more plot twists, to keep the series engaging.
That's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I originally got my start writing with fan fiction, and I started some of my work got kind of popular on fanfiction.net. It's my first efforts, honestly, looking back, like, how did I write this? They say every writer hates whatever they produced 5 years ago. I can't deny that I have some cringy moments there. But that's where I got started. And I started doing something called Chapters for Charity. I was already very prolific. So I started saying, all right, if anyone who donates, for every donation to this charity, or for every donor of blood or food to a food bank, well, blood to a blood bank, not to a food bank, that would be weird. But I would release an extra chapter a day early. And then somebody offered me $15 to donate to the charity of my choice if I would start a Discord server. Figured, all right, fine. I started the Discord server, figured there would be a dozen members, and then it would be gone in a couple of weeks. What ended up happening, it's now about 3,500 people, and it's been around for a couple of years. And a lot of my readers congregate there. This was right before I turned professional and started writing on commission and writing original works. But it just kind of grew out from that. And then I started going onto Reddit. I started taking commissions for small things. I actually wrote my very first commission for pizza. Somebody delivered a pizza to my room, and I wrote them a one-shot story for the characters that they wanted.
Will work for pizza. That should be your t-shirt.
Yeah, pretty much. That was where I got my start long before I got to the point where I am now. It's a lot of fun. I still look back at that fondly. But aside from finding my work on Amazon, I have a subreddit called r/The World Maker. I also have my author Discord, and I have my author Facebook page.
Wonderful.
So
Wonderful. It's good to keep engaged with the readers like that.
It really is. A lot of authors don't like to talk to their readers, but I find it fascinating. It's energizing to hear somebody say, this made me cry. This made me laugh. I really needed this today. This meant a lot to me. To hear something like that, that's just fuel to start pounding the keyboard some more.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You talked about writing fan fiction early on. What was the first fan fiction work? Were you writing about Star Wars, Star Trek? Tell us.
It was actually a Japanese light novel series called Overlord.
Okay.
Yeah, it was one of those stories that felt like it should be going further. It fairly begged for a war story. An author started writing one, a fan fiction, and I thought, okay, this is going to give me the story that I want. And then it didn't deliver. They kind of gave up, they quit. So I figured if I want to read a particular story, I have to write it myself. So I
Exactly.
did. And then it became popular, and then it ended up going. I thought it would be, 30,000 words, 10 chapters. I'll be done in 2 weeks. Instead, it took me over a year, when 1,000,000 words by its 1,046,000 words by itself, another 800,000 words worth of side stories,
Mhm.
and spawned a writing career. Who
Wow.
knew?
Who knew? We knew you back then. Let me ask you about Who Endures, since you are such a prolific writer. What's the central theme of that series?
Okay, so that main character is, it's a villain protagonist. Somebody actually compared it once to watching the rise of a Sith Lord, which I took as a compliment.
Mhm.
Um, she is a very damaged character. She has, the best way to explain it is, she never saw good people accomplish anything that
Right.
would actually make her life better. She ended up liberated from her oppressive environment and gaining her freedom, her education, and everything else, because evil people, or the evil that people were willing to do, ended up overthrowing her oppressors. A
Mm.
war of revenge set her free, and as a result, she came to the conclusion that the only way to do any lasting good was to be evil with good in mind. So
Mm.
she's a warped character, but she's very compelling in a lot of ways. She became quite popular. When I was writing her originally as just an original fan fiction character, and people were worried that she would be killed off in the story, there was
Mm.
actually a very brief Twitter campaign called Save Nua 2019, uh, where people sent me fan art of the character, encouraging me to not kill her off. I ended up keeping her, and then she ended up getting her own original story, where she sets out, her primary motivation is to save one person's life.
Mm.
One person who was, uh, how do I put this? He was a savior to a lot of her people. She's an elven character, and her people were mostly suffering under human oppression. A new religion ended up toppling that, and one character who was a changed man. He was basically almost like a John Brown like character,
Mhm.
but who wasn't always that. He reformed. He saved a lot of her people, and then ended up dying at the end. She wanted his life restored. So to do that, she set out on a campaign of conquest. She figured if she could conquer a large enough area, she could offer that as a tribute state to somebody who had the power over life and death, and they would restore him to life in exchange for what she would offer. In the end, though, her about halfway through the story, she starts to change her motivation. She starts to care about the people that she's ruling, the people that she's leading. She starts to care about the culture that she's in. She becomes very integrated. She becomes very um, assimilated into that culture, and she wants to protect it from what she sees as the greatest danger that it faces. In her mind, the great danger that her new home faces is from the very people that set her free in the first place,
Mm.
because they are overwhelmingly powerful, and they are going to start advancing towards her country and overthrow everything in their path. So, from her perspective, she fears cultural genocide.
Right.
So she wants to make her new empire not into something that is a tribute, but into something that is an equal, so that they can meet the old country, so to speak, on their terms and not fear their own destruction. The idea is very loosely based off of a series from years and years ago. A guy named Gary Jennings wrote a series called Aztec. Uh, he was a wonderful author, but there was a line in there that always stuck with me. Um, he said that somewhere along the way, the Mexica lost their vision of themselves as a noble and mighty people, and began to live comfortably under, or at least acceptingly under, the Spanish conquistadors.
Mm.
This was written about a period of war and revolution in that period. Now, it's just a kind of a throwaway line. It wasn't meant to be that much, but I always thought about that kind of thing. Romanization, Americanization, where cultural influences end up erasing people without even any war taking place. It's a tragic loss. You
Right.
know, we, I don't know, I'm kind of a language nerd. So, like, for example, you've heard the word garçon before.
Yes.
That's actually one of
Garçon.
the few, yeah, that word means boy.
Right.
It's one of the few words to survive from the original Gallic language. After Julius Caesar conquered the
Hmm.
region, he enslaved large numbers of the population, and that's as a result, almost all of their language was just gone. And that's one of the few words to survive and indicating a servant. Uh, so I got to thinking about that kind of thing and thought, well, what if a character had the sense to see what could happen, but they were ruthless, they were maybe evil, but they would have a more noble motivation and be willing to do absolutely anything, cross any lines at all, in order to rescue the people they saw themselves as responsible for. So that's really the central conflict. It's an underlying theme of uh, cultural security and personal growth and her own dealing with the fact that she knows that she's the villain in her own story, but she knows no other way to be in order to protect what she values. So there's a lot of influences here that come from different areas of history and culture that are, yeah, to be some degree uh, controversial, but it makes the story better. And when the end comes, when I finally finish the last book, it'll probably go about 12 books before the end.
Hmm.
I like to think that people will get something out of it for most of the characters.
Yeah. Well, I think flawed characters are the most interesting characters.
I would
If a character
agree.
is purely bad or purely good, it's kind of blah. But to have an
Yeah.
intriguing character who's a villain kind of hero makes for interesting and intriguing writing. And you're still working on this series. You're adding books to it right now, correct?
It's part of the name Who Endures comes from an expression, who conquers, who endures.
Hmm.
So it's bracketed in two parts. The Who Endures follows the story of Nua Callan Iwanor on her quest for conquest. The story of Who Conquers predates all that. It leads all the way up through the war and savagery and the overthrow of the old religion, the overthrow of the old gods, and the rise of the Mother of Terror. Uh, the Mother of Terror is a young paladin woman. She is part of a religious order. She's a devout believer in human supremacy, but she's also very isolated. She's naive. She thinks of everything that she does as being very benevolent, as herself as a defender of humanity. And then for the first time, she's exposed to the dark side of everything that she's been defending, and she's
Hmm.
appalled. And she goes so far as to speak against everything that she's ever believed in and is punished for it. And then she doesn't take that lightly. She embarks on a crusade of war and revenge to eliminate everything that she believes is wrong with her own society and ends up founding a whole new empire. And in
Hmm.
the course of it, ends up being the one to set Nua free. She does it by violence. She does it by war. She does it by being willing to crush every single thing that is in her path without any semblance of mercy or regret. And she pays a heavy price for it.
Hmm.
Her story deals heavily with what I've seen in terms of people dealing with PTSD, depression, regret for things that you can't undo. She has a very interesting story arc that leads all the way up to her death in her late 90s. Uh,
Very,
but
very
she's
interesting.
yeah, she's a really interesting character in part because she is so heavily flawed. Her mistakes, her misjudgments, her rigid thinking, uh, her very black and white mentality of this will change or you will suffer sort of a way of thinking makes things harder than it needs to. But in the end, she's an effective leader. She has a very, by any means, necessary mindset.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating character, fascinating series for sure. Another series you're working on, you are the busiest man in showbiz, as I said right at the start of this, Evolution of a Nobody. Tell us about that.
Okay. So that follows the story of a young man named Albert Baptiste Lamarck. He
Mhm.
is a young man who is the son of a once prominent scientist who faked his research, ended up leading to a lot of people dying through poor treatment options, and ended up with his family being disgraced. He lives in a state of total isolation, an outcast. You've probably heard the term the bad seed before.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because of whose child he is mistreated and isolated from his community and everything else. And then something happens. The only thing he's got going on in his life is a video game. I based it loosely off of Skyrim because I used to be a big Skyrim nut. Uh, but he's got this character that he plays that's become really powerful and so on and so forth within the game, and that's his only escape from his depressing reality. Then one day something goes awry. An angel and a demon from another world appear in his room, and it turns out is they were summoners from another world trying to call heroes to their world to be sacrificed to keep this as yet unrevealed dark evil sealed away. But because they tried to summon a video game character, not knowing what video games are, and video game characters don't exist, it backfired and that brought them to his world with no magic, and now they're stuck there. So
Mm.
they end up becoming, they end up sharing his residence, having nowhere else to go, and he realizes if they go out into the world, that's not going to end well for them. So they end up cohabitating with him, and they become very, very close friends. And it goes into his family's history, what's going on in the town, the truth of what's really happened, that is what his father actually did versus what the cover story is. There's a lot that goes into that, but it really deals with him kind of gaining some self-confidence back, getting his life back, so to speak, and becoming someone different than he used to be because of the influence of people who don't judge him for who his family is, don't judge him for who he used to be, and don't blame him for things that he didn't actually do.
Mm.
I actually drew on some of my own high school experience for that particular character. Uh, High school is not a pretty time for a lot of people, especially
Right.
for nerds, especially back, nerd culture is very popular now, but it wasn't always the case. So I did draw on little bits and pieces of my own high school experience to kind of get a feel for what the mean kids are like and how they treat the person who is the outcast, and how negligent school administrators can be when it comes to dealing with the kid that people don't like uh, expelling or punishing the person who is picked on for defending themselves, or blithely ignoring it because there's no actual complaint. Well, he didn't tell us anything was wrong, so we didn't do anything. Well, you've got eyes, don't you? Can't you see what they're doing? You're supposed to intervene. And a lot of times they don't. So there's urban fantastical elements to it, but it draws off very real emotions. And some readers have said that they identified very strongly with the character of Albert because it mimicked their own experience.
Mm.
It's a funny thing. The most outlandish stories in the most fantastical elements, maybe they make it easier for people to connect with characters as on a personal level because of the personalities at play. Even I can't fully explain it. No matter how crazy you make something, people can connect with the people involved. Maybe it's because they are in some way metaphorical for all our
Mm.
experiences.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that you can remember so much about what you write. That is just a side note. I find it fascinating because you got a lot going on, a lot of books, and these aren't individual books. These are series. So I think that's quite remarkable. We have about 5 minutes left. Let me ask you this question. I want you to choose among your children. Christopher Nolan comes to you and says, I want you to look at your body of work, and I want you to pick one book to start with. I want to create a series for Netflix. What book do you choose? What series do you choose, and why?
That's a good question.
Thank you.
If I had to pick one, my first go-to would be Who Endures, but that one would be really tough to turn into a series because of the massive cast. So I would probably pick How Misunderstandings Made a Demon Lord. And that one is about it's very, very unique. The character is in a world where cities haven't really occurred yet, for the most part. Like, you've got small villages, a lot of hunter-gatherers. Nobody's even heard of cities where he lives. He's a demon who lives among a village of other demons. He's got a very happy life. Everything is fine. Everything is good. And then rumors start to reach him from various travelers about something called a city. Well, what's a city? I've never heard of a city. A city where a lot of people get together and do things. And they're like, well, how do they feed themselves? How can you feed that many people? And he's like, well, you start by taking control of other villages and farms and having them bring food to the city. And he says, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would anyone do that? Because the very idea of war doesn't exist yet until it comes home to him. And his village is attacked. He and his daughter are two of the only survivors. He makes his way to a mountain that he knows of that he's never been to, because he's never been more than 100 yards from his own home. And shenanigans ensue. He starts finding other survivors from other villages, gathering them there in the mountain place, and ends up becoming the first demon lord, and someone who can rise to power to confront the rise of these city dwellers and the danger that they pose. So he ends up changing his own society. I've only got the first book out right now. I need to write the second one in the next couple of months. But that one would make a very good series on Netflix, in part because the cast size is manageable. The world building is unique. You don't really see a lot of series set in that kind of time period. And the characters themselves are quite compelling. They built up a little fan base of their own.
Great, great. Well, you can learn a lot about Robert's work on his website, theworldmaker.com. As you've heard today, as we've spoken, he truly is a world maker. He is a prolific writer who has written dozens of books. They are encapsulated in series. Among them are Adopted by Humans, Booze Hounds, Who Endures, and Evolution of a Nobody. And I feel like I relate to all of those titles. I think at one point in my life, I felt like I was adopted by humans. I was a booze hound, that I might endure, and that I was an evolution of a nobody. This is great work. This is a great body of work. Robert, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
All right. Well, I was happy to be here. Thank you for your time, and you have a great day.
You have a great day as well. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.